Bernie, on to you.
Thanks, Juliet. My name is Bernard Beitman, MD. I'm a psychiatrist and the founder of the Coincidence Project. Thanks for joining us here today for the launch of our Coincidence Project workshops, hosted by our amazing Coincidence Project board members, two of whom are presenting today. Each month, we'll offer exciting and interactive workshops for you to learn more about synchronicity and meaningful coincidences and how they can add more meaning and joy to your life. Please keep in mind that TCP, the Coincidence Project, is a nonprofit organization, which means that we use donations to help run this thing. Today's session is free to attend, and we also welcome any donations you may be able to make. There is no donation too small or too large, and you can get to the donation button by going to the Coincidence Project, all one word, thecoincidenceproject.net, and you'll see the donate button up on the top of the screen. Today's workshop is led by Lisa Honig Buksbaum, CEO and founder of
There you go, Bernie.
that has motivated more than 500,000 people to take active roles in their self-healing to enhance their physical, emotional, and mental well-being. Lisa is the author of a recent book called Soaring into Strength, Love Transcends Pain. Chris Mackey is the principal psychologist at Chris Mackey and Associates in Geelong, Australia. Chris is the host clinical and counseling psychologist there and the author of The Positive Psychology of Synchronicity and the host of Psych Spiels, a podcast. Now it's my great pleasure to turn it over to Chris and Lisa.
Well, thank you very much, Bernie. Appreciate that. And as people will find, Lisa and I are very interested in thriving. We're interested in the field of positive psychology, which is about promoting well-being, not just easing distress, but promoting the positive pole of well-being. And we believe that synchronicity has some features that puts it in an uncommon place to be able to support well-being, and that some of that overlaps with principles of spirituality and benefits of spirituality. That's going to come across, I believe, in some of our personal stories. And later on, there'll be a chance in breakout rooms for people to share some of your own personal stories. And we hope from that some of those stories will convey benefits to well-being that you've experienced from synchronicity or meaningful coincidences. Now, I think of synchronicity as being any kind of weird and wonderful coincidence, but it basically means a meaningful coincidence that somehow links our inner and outer worlds. What's going on in our mind is somehow connected to our external reality that has a numinous or mystical or spiritual quality to it. There are a range of different types of synchronicity, but it can relate to any coincidence, any striking coincidence that you find subjectively meaningful. There are some more common types. One type is propinquity, which technically means nearness or closeness. And that's an example of where you think of someone that you haven't seen for a long time, and you suddenly run into them or hear from them, you encounter them out of the blue. And so it just seems so uncanny. It seems to be more than chance. Then there's number synchronicity. Many people report that one of the early experiences that they have of synchronicity is seeing the repeated number 1111 on a clock. In my case, I encountered the repeated number 6. And so I was a skeptic when I first read about synchronicity, but as soon as I read about it, within days, I was experiencing an explosion of synchronicity in terms of the repeated number 6, and commonly in the context of dating my girlfriend who became my wife. And so if we stayed in a hotel room, it was uncanny how often it would be the 6th room on the 6th floor, such as room 66 or room 606. It became a running joke. It came up in many different ways. So in some ways, it wasn't surprising, but it did seem a weird coincidence when through unexpected events, we got engaged at 6 o'clock on the 6th of June. Now, 6 years later, and I didn't plan this was unexpected, I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital at 6 o'clock on the 6th of June. And through that helpless time, the one thing that gave me more hope is I recognized the auspiciousness of that time and date is I felt that some good might come out of that experience. And indeed, many of the best things that I've experienced in my life have partly followed from the learning of having gone through that dark time. So I'm glad to have never experienced like that again, anything like that again in the last 35 years. But there was something in the synchronicity of that date that gave me hope. It turned out realistic hope, that real good could come from it. Now, Lisa's going to mention some personal stories that illustrate the next two types of synchronicity we're highlighting: a sense of a person's presence after death, and fortuitous events, where we might use the expression, the universe provides.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here with you as always, and to all of our friends in the Coincidence Project. So excited to be sharing with you. And I might add that as you become more of a high frequency coincidencer, these things will start appearing more and more frequently. In fact, yesterday, I was thinking about an advertising agency I hadn't worked at for 32 years. And when I got to my office and turned on my laptop, there was an email inviting me to a reunion. The first time I'd heard of from anyone in this company in 25 years. That's propinquity. The story I wanted to share with you is called The Red Cardinal, and it's a short story from my book. A few months after my father's death, I was traveling to the Kripalu Center about 4 hours away from my home in New York City. It was a snowy day, and I was going to be the keynote speaker talking about healing imagery and the power of imagination to help us heal. I wasn't exactly feeling like a keynote speaker, though, because my daddy had died just a few weeks before. And as I pulled into the driveway, I was singing the whole time going there. But when I pulled into the driveway of the center, I started crying because I was overcome with a sense of dread and sadness. On the left side of my peripheral vision, I noticed something fluttering. And as I slowly turned my head, I didn't even have to look because I already knew that it was a red cardinal. During my father's last 2 weeks of his life, I was his death doula, which meant that I just decided I was going to stay by his side and help him make the transition. And during one of those long nights, sleepless nights, I got a message that when he died, he was going to come to me as a red cardinal, which was curious because I didn't have any relationship with this bird. I really had never even seen one in real life, in waking life. And there it was, the first red cardinal, exactly at the moment I needed to get that confirmation or a warm, synchronistic, coincidental hug from my dearly departed daddy. The second story, as Chris mentions, relates to the fifth point on the slide, which is fortuitous events, which give you a sense that the universe is providing for you. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotations: when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And it's how I discovered the field of positive psychology. It was a bizarre day in New York City. They were predicting hurricane warnings, which had never happened. And I was walking to Barnes & Noble because my family was about to leave on a trip to Montreal. And being like a real wonky science kind of gal, I wanted to buy some books to read while we were going on this 3-day weekend. As I was going up the escalator in the bookstore, a book started flashing to me. I can assure you that this had never happened. I'm a businesswoman. My feet are very much on the ground, but this book was flashing, emitting light. So I said to the book silently, "I see you and I'm coming." I went up the escalator, I came down the escalator, and I picked up the book, and it was Flourish by Dr. Martin Seligman. That's strange, I thought. He was one of the most popular professors at the University of Pennsylvania when I was an undergraduate student there about 30 years ago. I said to the book, also under my breath, "I think I'm supposed to read you." Well, that weekend I devoured the book and applied to Dr. Martin Seligman's program, the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology, and was accepted to the program a few weeks later. Marty's the founder of the field. And it was in this program that I discovered how to link the science of all the things that Chris and I will be talking about today to the work that I was doing to help people take active roles in their healing. So those are two examples to show you that it could be something very small or something more important in your life, but synchronicity is always there if we're open to being open. Back to you, Chris.
Well, what is spirituality? So you're going to describe to us, Lisa, how you would think of spirituality.
Perfect. So a lot of times when people think about religion, it creates such a gulf, such a divide. As you know from the news, that so much of conflict in the world and division is caused by religious differences. But when we're talking about religion, we're talking about lowercase r, we're talking about the good parts of religion, people loving thy neighbor as thyself, people seeing the goodness, the grace, or the divinity in everything, whether that's plants and the animal kingdom or human beings. So when we're talking about spirituality, we're talking about sacred experiences such as music, the vastness of nature, holding the hand of a newborn. And spirituality is experienced when we feel connected and elevated in relationships. These examples of spiritual moments, and they don't last 24/7, they don't last every day of our life. Like many positive emotions or negative emotions, they ebb and flow. But what they do is they help us become our best possible selves. They remind us that we're part of something much larger than our individual lives. Spirituality can be ignited when we feel these sense of having a life purpose or experience meaning. So there's a lot of research on spirituality. It's not just this woo-woo, touchy-feely thing that Chris and I are going to break into singing Kumbaya songs to you or Amazing Grace, although singing is a very important element of spirituality. But we see after the 9/11 attacks, 90% of people surveyed turned to religion for solace. And 76%, 3/4 of the population, experienced something more sacred than just maternal existence, which is such a refreshing scientific statistic, because if you look at most popular culture and a lot of the media, it just seems that people are hugging their vehicles and their acquisitions and their Instagrammable, exotic vacations, but there's a lot more to that than just things that can be bought. It reminds me of the phrase, the best things in life cannot be seen and heard, but sometimes simply must be felt in the heart. Over 25%, oops, can you go back?
Sorry.
Over 25% of people in the United States are spiritual, but not religious. And 50% of people all around the world from each and every continent endorse the belief in paranormal phenomenon. So things have changed. Things are changing where people are feeling more comfortable to talking about these things.
And so if many people turn to spirituality, what might be some of the benefits? Well, we'll look at what some of the benefits can be from synchronicity that we will relate to spirituality as Lisa described. Many people find the experience of meaningful coincidences affirming. It can add to people's sense of life purpose and direction and meaning in life. I often experience it as like a tick from the universe that you're on the right track. So coincidences aren't always positive, but often people experience them as being affirming. It can add to our sense of connection to other people, partly through propinquity, but also to the world beyond us. And synchronicity encourages us to use our intuition. Often in our education, we're very encouraged to think rationally. It's not always so encouraged to think intuitively. Considering meaningful coincidences, it encourages us to be intuitively open, but also when we interpret what the coincidence means to us, we draw on our intuition there. It's a window into a larger consciousness. It seems that there might be a higher organizing force in the universe, and that way it also helps access a spiritual or transpersonal dimension in life, adding to our sense of meaning. And with its overlap with spirituality, there are objective benefits. to our well-being from spirituality. But also, synchronicity can have a transformative power that Lisa and I have both experienced with our work with clients as well as in our own lives. We would suggest that the potential for that transformative power is greater. The more improbable and the more meaningful the coincidence, the greater its potential transformative power. And now I'll hand over to Lisa.
So I wanted to just share a short story of how Chris and I met for the second time, totally coincidentally or synchronistically. In Los Angeles, I was invited to attend the International Positive Psychology Association World Congress just 3 weeks after graduating from my master's program in positive psychology. So as I was walking into the conference center in Los Angeles, a fellow says to me, Chris, "Hello, I'm Chris Mackey. And what brings you here?" So I introduced myself and I said that, what I was doing there. And he said, "I'm here because I just wrote a book about synchronicity and I'm really excited about it." And I said, "That's really interesting because aside from practicing my faith, which is Judaism, I also lived my life through the concept of synchronicity." So what were the odds of Chris Mackey attending his first positive psychology conference and running into someone who said, "I live my life through the foundations of synchronicity"? So fast forward 6 years later, we're walking into the convention center in Melbourne, Australia, Chris's continent, and there's 1,600 people. There's never been such a large group attending this conference. And the first person that I hear someone say, "Lisa, Lisa," and I turn around and it's Chris. So that's an example of really being in the right place at the right time and getting this confirmation and feeling the transformative power of synchronicity. So I wanted to talk to you. We wanted to share the PERMA theory of well-being, which is created by Marty Seligman, the founder of the field of positive psychology, and just give you a brief overview. There's a lot more about this in Chris Mackey's amazing book, Positive Psychology of Synchronicity. And also, if you go to Google Scholar, you can read up a lot about our new field, which is 35 years old, but hundreds of thousands of important works have been written in this field. So this slide explains the key components of Seligman's PERMA theory of well-being. And as positive psychology thought leaders, we wanted to include this well-respected and well-loved model to show you the synergy between positive psychology and synchronicity. There are many science-based exercises and activities that you can do that will allow you to experience greater flourishing each day. And just like you're learning more about synchronicity and how you can pay attention to it and learn to rely on it in your daily life, when you focus on these core pillars of PERMA, the positive emotions, a sense of engagement, not multitasking, really being where you are in the present, a heightened appreciation and attention and a commitment to the key relationships in your life, a sense of meaning and purpose, and lastly, a sense of achievement. When you focus on these core pillars of PERMA, you will soon find that they will amplify joy and meaning and agency and well-being in your life and also in the lives of those closest to you.
And so when we look at those dimensions of well-being, they overlap with findings of the benefits of sacred experience or spiritual experience as described by Ken Pargament. He's a psychology professor from Ohio who's done some of the most remarkable research on the objective benefits of sacred experience. And so that includes when people experience their roles, their work roles as sanctified, they would find it a calling, or a relationship being sanctified as feeling meant to be. But a sacred moment can be a transcendent moment. And we could think of synchronicity as being like a sacred moment. It tends to lead to better general well-being, a greater sense of purpose in life, more time and energy on those work and other kind of goals. People are more resilient when they face hardship. They have more satisfaction in their relationships. And that's reflected partly that when couples are in conflict, if their relationship is sanctified, then they tend to persist longer in looking to address that conflict. So we'd see that many of those benefits of spiritual experience and spiritual coping strategies overlap with the PERMA model. And so when we think of the link between synchronicity and spirituality, Carl Jung, who coined the term synchronicity, the Swiss psychiatrist, he referred to synchronicity as numinous experience. So that's also experience that has an uncanny or sacred kind of quality. Therefore, it's not surprising that the benefits attributed to spiritual experiences described by Pargament and sacred moments, they could be counted on to apply to synchronicity as well. So now I'd like to mention a personal example of synchronicity, which really strengthened my interest in the positive psychology field further. And it came up when I'd been working as a psychologist in Geelong for 25 years. I wondered, how would I mark that milestone? And I thought, I'd like to give a free community talk for 1 hour, when I sum up in 1 hour the most useful things I'd learned from working for 25 years as a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist. I spent 10 minutes talking about Jungian synchronicity, and I spent 20 minutes talking about Martin Seligman and positive psychology, because I thought that was an emerging field that people would still be talking about in 100 years' time. And there's not much I'd come up across in psychology after 25 years that I thought that would be a really lasting new field, but positive psychology I thought would be one. Well, anyway, a year after that talk, I got to meet Seligman in Anaheim, the photo on the left. There was a psychotherapy conference, and Seligman was one of the main people that led me to want to go to America to hear him speak. I got a photo with him afterwards, but sadly, his eyes were closed. Now, to my great surprise, a year later, I heard that Seligman and his team of researchers were going to come to Geelong, my hometown, 200,000 people, an hour away from Melbourne. Seligman was going to live here for 6 months, bring a team for 2 years, have many luminaries join him to start up the largest ever international project on positive psychology at Geelong Grammar. I thought that was a remarkable example of, again, when the pupil is ready, I was ready to learn more about positive psychology, and then the teacher appears. When I gave that talk the following year about what I'd learned in 25 years, the 1 hour talk, I was able to use the slide on the right, because after Seligman came to Geelong at first, that very first meeting, I saw him at the school. I silently showed him the photo with his eyes closed. He said, you want a photo with me with my eyes open, don't you? And I said, yes. And so he obliged with that. And I got to meet him and his team in informal settings. I got to see the development of positive psychology with an organization from the inside out. When I repeated that talk later on, I used the slide on the right, described that example, and said, now that's synchronicity. Certainly strengthened my interest in the field. Now, sometimes I'd wonder, is just some people are particularly interested in synchronicity, like Lisa and myself and many of you here? Are we just synchro nuts? Or are there more people who experience it but don't maybe talk about it much further because they're afraid of seeming weird or crazy to other people? So partly to check out that hypothesis that more people experience it, for a milestone birthday, my 60th birthday, I asked my friends in lieu of a gift to bring a story of synchronicity. I invited 100 people, 40 of them supplied a story of synchronicity, and at times striking things. 2 examples of saved lives. An example of propinquity, someone ran into his uncle in, first of all, London. The uncle was the next person to walk into a pub. In New York, the uncle was seated at a table at a restaurant next to him. Then twice in Melbourne, and this person lived in regional Australia, about 6 hours from Melbourne. That's turbocharged propinquity. And there are also examples, for someone dreaming of a school friend they hadn't seen for 20 years. They run into that person the very next day. And it had a profound connection because that person was able to help this other person with great difficulties that they had in their life. So I'll just mention that there's a blog on my website, I'll mention later, or you can Google the blog Synchronicity in a Jar, and it describes in detail these kind of examples, which are quite remarkable examples. And I think it shows that more people experience synchronicity than let on, and that 40% of people who contributed to my Synchronicity jar, which is just over there as well. That overlaps with surveys. A couple of surveys I've seen which estimate that about 40% of people have experienced synchronicity.
Excellent. So thanks, Chris. Those are great. So now we're going to invite everyone to share your own synchronicity stories with each other. In just a moment, Juliet's going to put you into small breakout rooms with a few other people, and you're going to be given a few minutes to answer the following prompts. What is your synchronicity story? Have you personally experienced a meaningful coincidence? It can be simple, recent, or from a long time ago. Don't overthink it. What did you make of it at the time or afterward? What was the impact for you? Was there a message? Did it connect to someone or something larger than yourself? And then what was the impact for others? Because these stories can be empowering. And what we see in the Coincidence Cafe, which we have on the third Saturday of each month when we do breakout rooms, oftentimes people in your breakouts, or when we come back to the larger group, people have the same experience with the same item. One time it was foxes. A lot of people had stories about foxes, which is kind of arbitrary. And other times it was about balloons and so on. So it'll be very enlivening for you and exciting for you to share your stories with each other. And also, we have found, Chris and I, over the past decades, that we've experienced this with our clients, whether it's through my private healing imagery practice or Chris's psychology practice, or through the work I do with Soaringwords. So there's nothing you could say that's a silly thing or frivolous thing to say. This is a safe and respectful community. So now we're going to go to the breakout rooms, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the other side of the breakouts. Have fun. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back.
Wonderful. So pretty much everyone's back. Okay. Well, so from our presentations earlier and our stories earlier, then with Lisa and my stories, we would have conveyed how synchronicity contributed to our own well-being, including our interest in positive psychology. And funnily enough, that our stories overlapped with our encounters with Martin Seligman. There was a synchronistic thing about our presentation today. We hadn't actually planned that there'd be such close parallels between the personal stories that we would bring up. So that's, as Juliet described, was a meta synchronicity. So meta coincidence. So we wonder if you reflect on the conversations that you just had in the breakout rooms, whether you notice some of the positive well-being effects of synchronicity coming through for you. Did it add to a sense of joy or positive emotion? Did it help your engagement in life or work roles? Did it enhance your relationships or sense of connection with others in some way? Did it add to your sense of meaning? Well, being a meaningful coincidence, presumably it would have. And then did it help your sense of achievement or accomplishment? So now looking at some of our conclusions, synchronicity can benefit many aspects of well-being, including engagement in roles, sense of life purpose and meaning, that affirming sense that comes with it, the connections with others. Synchronicity can lead to transformative change. And again, Lisa and I would have used examples of that. Some of that might have come up in your own discussions. And again, we would suggest that the more improbable and meaningful the synchronicity, the greater its potential to help people transform. And what we've looked to describe is how the benefits of synchronistic experience overlap with the well-being benefits of spirituality, as described by Ken Pargament. Now, very much with the Coincidence Project, we're on about encouraging people to share their stories, which you've just done. We believe that there are benefits in people telling their stories. It helps us appreciate and even amplify those benefits by being able to acknowledge it with others. But it also helps reduce the concerns or fears that people might have that it's overly weird, or that there's that other people might just think they're crazy, something like that. We think that there's great benefit from sharing these stories. There'll be a chance in the Q&A later on to mention something about your own stories, some of our own stories might include, for example, experience of dreams or other kind of experiences that will be discussed in the Coincidence Cafe this weekend, as will be described later on. So if you're interested in sharing further stories, there'll be an opportunity this weekend.
What good-looking people we are. This is just our contact information if you want to follow up with us after today's session. We've had so much fun spending this time with you. And on the next slide, drum roll please, these are our books, little shameless plug. They're available on Amazon. Next slide, please. This is Chris and his wonderful son, Rowan, and this is their fabulous Psych Spiels podcast that Bernie and I have both been guests on. It's a lot of fun. It's a great podcast. Check it out.
Yeah, quite a few stories on synchronicity, and I'll mention the episode with Lisa was a wonderful episode. I'll particularly suggest that one.
And now we want to open the floor to questions. So type away in the chat, and or you could unmute yourself, and we will love to get through as many questions as we can. We're here for you. So who wants to go first?
And people can also raise their hand using the function with your mouse at the bottom of the screen. You can go to reactions and it'll has a raise hand function, and that helps us see who has a question. You can also just post it in the chat and we'll answer them coming in from there. It can be a comment. If you don't have a question, you might want to share something that's occurred to you, or perhaps that you came up from your breakout group. So I see Brian, if you want to come off mute, Brian.
Hello, so nice to see you too, and wonderful presentation. I was just thinking about how synchronicities can enhance a person's well-being and provide a sense of guidance, and I think that's very important, but there are also many mechanics involved on a metaphysical level for how these things work. And just because a synchronicity occurs, it isn't necessarily what a person may think it is, or doesn't necessarily signify that. A person can have a synchronicity involving a flamingo and be a hiring manager, and then see the next candidate wearing a necklace with a flamingo and view that as a sign from the universe that they should be hired. It could turn out to be the wrong hire. That can happen because, well, they attached themselves to the outcome, or they didn't realize the energies were interacting, and it wasn't necessarily because of the outcome that they were looking for, if that makes any sense. Anyway, as I've gone through my particular path on my particular journey, I've had to learn about many mechanics of these things and how they interact in daily life and on a more macro level as well. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brian. Always a pleasure to see you and to hear you share your insights with us. Great to see you. Thanks for sharing.
Wonderful, Brian. There's something about our interpretations of synchronicity that is going to be subjective. And there's benefits of being open to our intuition that way, but also we can be a little bit flexible with that. We don't have to be dogmatic with our interpretations and just look at it in a rigid kind of way. So we're also talking about there being a lot of benefits to synchronicity. Sometimes coincidences can be very unfortunate. Well, like being admitted to a psychiatric hospital at a certain time. However, often people find in retrospect that those experiences have nudged them on their life path or destiny that's ultimately proved to be somewhat positive or constructive. But yes, it's important at times not to be black and white with our interpretations, I think.
And not to attach.
Yes, not be too attached to them.
Right.
Thank you.
You know, one of the very heartening things is that the Templeton Foundation recently released some research showing that over 50% of people are talking about these stories more with spirituality and things that are significant and coincidences and the meaning that they attribute to it. And in my work, working with 500,000 people that are going through setbacks, trauma, illness. It's really important for healthcare professionals, and what we saw with the global pandemic, with neighbors, friends, family members, strangers, to validate people's feelings and to let people know that we see them, we're listening to them, we respect them. And in that psychological safety, in that safe space, then people could share some of these experiences, which start out a little tentative, but it just feels so good to be able to share something like having a visitation or a message from a bird or a deceased loved one or a dream, and to be able to unburden oneself with that. And also, that's one of the beauties of the Coincidence Project, that when we do get together each month, we hear these stories from other people, and it's affirming for us. A lot of times, one of our board members had this question, and the two other people I was on the breakout room with him were like, hello, this woman is supposed to be, in your life. And then like 6 weeks later, when we got back together, he's like, guess what? That relationship has moved forward, but it was right there in front of his face. He just needed other people to confirm or listen to what he was saying. It was very obvious to us. So sometimes, as the fictional character Sherlock Holmes said, the most obvious place to hide something is right under someone's nose. And that's why we're coming together. And that's why Bernard Beitman created the Coincidence Project, so that we can have this global community of people that are curious, that are respectful, and that are interesting, and that are interested in living their best possible lives and sharing and learning from each other. So it's so affirming to hear you all and to share the stories and to be able to come together and share our stories with you.
And we have one question that came into the chat that is for Lisa. What is the meaning of the concept soaring words? How does it connect to resilience?
Okay, so I think of it as a coincidence or synchronistic story. There were 3 experiences with death and illness in my family that happened in a 10-month period in 1998. My only sibling had died suddenly of an asthma-induced heart attack. And I got the call at 4 o'clock in the morning, and 2 hours later had to tell my parents the terrible news. 5 weeks later, my daddy had a second bout of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the doctors told me and my mom he was going to die. My daddy lived for 19 years cancer-free. So we made signs and messages, and everyone on that oncology floor came to my father's room every day for a month because they wanted to laugh and be in the community and have a sense of hope. And that's where I learned that attitude is an essential part of your healing. And the last piece of that trifecta of trauma happened when my oldest son, Jonathan, became catastrophically stricken with rheumatic fever. He had heart damage and neurological damage, and the kid was really bedridden for 4 very long months. So being someone of tremendous faith, the neurologist said, get out of New York City and go be by the water. So we rented a small cottage and we lived there for 4 months. And every morning I would walk along the beach before my son, Jonathan, and my younger son, Josh, who was a baby, and before my husband woke up. So I'd be walking along the beach, crying, praying, singing. And the name Soaring Words came to me from above. I had a calling. I saw my whole life flash in front of me. I saw all the children and families in the pediatric cardiology wing and the pediatric neurology wing. And I knew that I was meant to help them heal. And I changed my whole life around. I ran an award-winning advertising agency and worked for international ad agencies. And I just walked away from that to create this not-for-profit. So the name Soaring Words came to me from above. And I'll just use a similar example. Like when Moses was given the 10 Commandments, he didn't say, I think 12 is a better number, or what do you think about 8? So I took the name on. A lot of times people think it's a poetry thing or something like that. But what the idea is to connect people to that inner strength, that inner greatness, that inner creativity that each one of us possesses, and to activate that by doing something counterintuitive, which is to invite someone to do something positive for someone less fortunate than themselves. So that's kind of a long answer to how I've spent the last 22 years. But the name was a synchronistic calling. In fact, it really was the inflection point in my life that led me on this new pathways. It also ties with what the PERMA concept of meaning and purpose, and the concept of post-traumatic growth, that when something terrible happens to us, as Chris was mentioning with his being admitted to a psychiatric hospital, sometimes Dr. Richard Tedeschi, who's the founder of the field of post-traumatic growth, talks about the 5 domains, and one of them is no one wishes for the trauma or setback to happen, but afterwards, 3/4 of people surveyed say that they had heightened sense of appreciation of relationships, a sense of awe and wonder, a sense of meaning and purpose. So there can be a lot of, if we're open to being open and experiencing all that life is sharing with us and throwing at us, then there can be real healing, self-healing, and growth and redemption. So I hope that answers your question, and thanks for asking it.
Yes, and we have a question from John Townley. John, you can come off mute to ask your question.
I noticed it with the little group I was in, a very familiar situation, which is communication between loved ones in an unexpected fashion, usually in a point of anxiety, whether it's about death or whether it's about illness. And this is something that is, of course, you can take a positive. When people share these, they can have a positive feeling together about it, that they're united in something unusual and maybe unexplainable that's happened to both of them, and therefore they take heart that there's greater things going on. And in many cases, it's a loved one is feeling your anxiety, or someone's just died and everybody who's around them is thinking about you because you're the son or the father or whoever, and that gets across to people. And that is a mystery, but is it really a synchronicity, or is it in a larger sense? Because this happens all the time, and the more research there is, the more it's seen that this kind of transmission happens to people in times of anxiety, particularly people who are in small groups that know each other well. And so it's more, in a way, it's like a phone call. Someone's feeling, think something really bad happened, or, I have to call, my son and tell him. Now, if that happens to you psychically, as it were, then it's somehow synchronicity, where if they just rang you on the phone, it would be just another phone call. And I think a lot of this is we are having problems with separating what synchronicity might be, which is something that's truly unusual and actually things that are happening in areas of sort of spiritual technology that are increasingly obviously and probably will be thoroughly researched sooner rather than later, but are in fact themselves normal facts. You do hear from people when they're in stress, and if you share that with someone, you often feel better about it, simply because that's the nature of people, that if they share, they feel better. And they feel reassured. And if they don't know how it's happening, then they feel that there's a greater force somehow or other that they don't understand. And that's kind of reassuring too. But the greater force simply may be the technology that is magic, until you see that it's actually technology, which in the case of psi experiences between people, is probably something that is maybe more mundane than synchronicity.
You said one of Chris's favorite words, psi, and there's so much science about this, which he's going to talk about in a minute. So thank you, John, for sharing that.
Sure.
Yes, and so there will be an opportunity, as we mentioned on the weekend, the Coincidence Cafe, to mention something about your experience of dreams or visions or precognition. So if that came up in your stories, please tune into the Coincidence Cafe this weekend. Now, Juliet will wind us up with some upcoming project events.
Okay, sure. So this is the first in our new monthly speaker series, and we have also a monthly Coincidence Cafe. So both of those are shown here on the slide. The Coincidence Cafe takes place on the third Saturday of every month. And once you register for that, it's the same link each time to join us. And we always have new co-hosts and we explore different topics each time. I'm going to drop that link again in the chat here for you. And then in our speaker series, our next talk will be given by Dr. Bernard Beitman, who opened today and is the founder of the Coincidence Project. His talk will be on cultivating meaningful coincidences. And then May 6th, a panel on the shades of coincidence meaning. June, we'll have a talk, the exact date's TBD, but we'll be announcing it on our website under participate, which is our page to give you lots of opportunities to participate and be with us. And so Eon Karas will lead a talk on synchronicity in your soul mission. In July, Jess Price-Jones will lead a session on intuition at work. And in August, I will lead a session along with Matthew Zylstra from South Africa on nature, coincidences, and compassion. So we do hope to see you at more of our events. We hope you'll share your own stories on our story forum. We hope you'll share your feedback on our evaluation forum. And thanks for being with us. And thank you so much to our speakers for taking the lead and launching our speaker series. Thanks, both of you, so much.
Thank you all for coming along.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And on behalf of everyone here today, we want to thank Juliet Trail and Bernard Beitman for convening the Coincidence Project and all the incredible work that they're doing. And if you enjoyed today's session and you got some meaning out of it and thought it was beneficial, perhaps you want to consider making a small or large donation to the Coincidence Project, which would be wonderful. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next cafe. Have a great day, night, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.